Good morning and good afternoon. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful program for you today on the Nord Stream 2 project. Is this an EU and German project? We are presenting dissonant voices from Europe who have a very different point of view. We will start with a video from Green parliamentarian from the German Bundestag, Manuel Sarrazin. That will be followed by a panel discussion with former Prime Minister of Lithuania, Kubilius, with Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, and then with German Green parliamentarian in the European Parliament, Viola von Kramon. And with that, we will turn over to the video to Mr. Sarrazin.
Nord Stream 2 is not only a pipeline project connecting Germany and Russia. It is clearly a geostrategic project of the Kremlin to circumvent Ukraine. On the one hand, to bring Ukraine in financial problems. It is hitting the most tax-paying company of Ukraine. But also, I'm sure you can make a bet, within the next 5 to 10 years, we will see the Kremlin switching off the existing pipelines throughout Ukraine towards Europe to put political pressure and the right momentum on the political system in Kiev. Nord Stream 2 is not only a project which is destabilizing Ukraine and bring it into economic trouble, which in the end might even lead to financial aid packages for holding up economic circumstances in Ukraine on a good level, our taxpayers will pay for. It is also a project clearly splitting up Europe. There's a clear mistrust against Nord Stream 2 and also the German energy policy and actually in general European policy within our important Central European neighbor states. But last and not least, Nord Stream 2 is a bet against climate goals signed in Paris. Nord Stream 2 will only bring profits and benefits to the investment if Europe is not holding its promises subscribed in the Paris climate change goals. So it's clear, Nord Stream 2 is a project politically hazardous for Europe, bringing Ukraine into a geopolitical trouble, which is only sensible for an aggressive pursuit of the Kremlin towards to, and it is bad for the climate. This is why the Greens in Germany are strongly opposing this project.
Okay, that was Manuel Sarrazin. We wish we had had him with us today, but we're delighted we had his video. So I'd like to start with Ms. von Kramon. Why do you oppose Nord Stream 2?
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Herbst, for inviting me. I can only reiterate what my colleague from the German Bundestag has just rightly said. This is an anti-European project. It's not just a project. It's actually, as he rightly put it, it's a geostrategical instrument of the Kremlin. It is to weaken the EU in general. It's to weaken the energy union of the European Union. It's to weaken the geostrategical alliance with Ukraine. It's to weaken also, as you have rightly said, so the Paris Agreement and our obligation there. So overall, there is no good argument for being in favor of this project, and it was even so put in place right when the German government was pretty busy with handling the migration situation during the 15-16 situation, and that was, I think, looking at this now, a big mistake, a failure. Maybe the chancellor has taken it not seriously enough. She has left it to the Social Democrats in Germany, to the Ministry for Economics, which was in the hand and is in the hand of Social Democrats. And so maybe reiterate what many of my colleagues in the European Parliament think. Maybe in the current situation with the difficulties, the current Russian EU relation, things would have been differently now.
That's very interesting. So just to explore this a little bit more, why do you think then this project has gotten going in Germany? What are the dynamics driving it forward?
At that time, the influence of the former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder is not to underestimate. What I've heard, bullied his colleagues in the Ministry for Foreign Affairs as well as the Ministry for Economy quite a lot. He was heavily involved in pipeline of Nord Stream 1 already, while we know that, for example, the capacity is not completely used that. And the Ukrainian Druzhba pipeline is does work, function. It is completely used, so there is no necessity from the, let's say, capacity point. I guess there was a heavy lobbying activity going on from his side, from Gazprom's side, from many other so-called institutional side. Some of the business communities in Germany around the chambers were heavily involved in this. Of course, I guess that some companies will benefit from this so-called new project. And overall, I guess it was very sad that none of the bigger parties has confronted either the Chancellor or the Ministry for Economy with the political consequences, with the political implications, especially while we have seen now in the European Parliament, after debating it last Monday in the committee here, that there is a large majority, really a large majority of colleagues against that, and rightly so.
Just one more question. The supporters of Nord Stream 2 in Germany claim that efforts to stop it represent an impingement on German sovereignty. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's the opposite, actually. German sovereignty will be much more under pressure if we finish the project and if it will be used with gas as a transport. And our dependency on Russian import gas will increase significantly. So the oligopoly situation of Gazprom will increase. There will be pressure then on the price from the demand side, from the supplier side. We still don't know how the EU will handle that, while Nord Stream 2 or Gazprom has not unbundled its grid from the production, so that is still needs to be implemented or compliant. I see that the sovereignty, which let's say the proponents of the project claim, this is actually the opposite. So we as Greens were never in favor of having the stronger path dependency on fossil fuels. In that respect, the pipeline is not climate friendly. It increases this, plus the geostrategic threat coming from Russia, coming from the Kremlin. They can blackmail us at any time. It is a huge threat to our political stability. I don't see that there will be an increase in sovereignty.
I think your point is exactly right, especially when you consider, as you mentioned, the role of the former German Chancellor, who's handsomely compensated by Mr. Putin and his role in pushing Germany in that direction. Okay. Prime Minister Kubilius, you have been a clear statesman in Europe, understanding the geopolitical dangers that Putin's revisionist policies represent. What, in your judgment, is the geopolitical danger of Nord Stream 2?
Well, there are very clear dangers, and some of them were spoken out by member of Bundestag, Mr. Sarrazin, from the Green Party, and my colleague Viola von Kramon, she continued. I would name several of them. First of all, of course, this project is bringing a lot of geopolitical, dangers to Ukraine, starting from, of course, from losses of financial incomes and so on, which really are significant for still quite a fragile Ukrainian economy. Second, what we need to have in mind, at least what military experts are saying, that back in 2014, when Russia started military aggression against Ukraine in the eastern part of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Lugansk, so one of the reasons why they were quite, I would say, not so willing to move forward into other territories of Ukraine was very simple, that, they were afraid to damage gas transit infrastructure in Ukraine, which Russian Gazprom was using and still is using to transport gas to European countries. So if that transit infrastructure will not be needed anymore after Nord Stream 2 will become operational, then of course the question is how Russian militaries will behave towards Ukraine, and if that will not open for them some kind of temptation to become even more aggressive if you compare with what they're doing now. And the last point, I see really that this project, which is supported by German government, it's not an EU project, it's a German government project, what Viola von Kramon have said, it influences in some way, maybe not directly, but even indirectly, German policy, German foreign policy towards Russia itself. Germany is not free to be critical as it is needed sometimes to be critical on Russian behavior, not only outside of Russia, but also inside of Russia, what they're doing with Navalny, what they're doing with their citizens, which are demanding, which are starting to demand more loudly, freedoms, elections, and so on and so on. And that is what perhaps Putin really considered, that with Nord Stream 2, he can silence the German government on some of those very, very, very important issues, because you cannot be at the same time very critical on Russian, on Putin regime policy towards Navalny and towards ordinary people of Russia, and at the same time to defend, Nord Stream 2 project as German government needs to do. So that's what makes really impact on the whole EU policy towards Russia, since really Germany, from that point of view, is a very important country.
Thank you. I have another question for you, Mr. Prime Minister. Just as supporters of the project claim that efforts to stop it represent an impingement on German sovereignty, they also say it represents an impingement on European Union prerogatives. What do you think about that argument?
Well, I think that those arguments are really not very, very rational ones. First of all, we need to remember, Nord Stream 2 is not an EU project. It's a German government project from this side, German government agreement with Russian government, with Gazprom. Even more recently, as my colleague Viola have mentioned, we had an important energy committee, so-called ITRE committee meeting back in European Parliament, where European Commission representatives who are responsible for energy security and everything connected with pipelines and gas supplies very clearly said that Nord Stream 2 is not a project of EU common interest. It does not bring any kind of added value to security supply of European Union, and so on and so on. So Nord Stream 2 is very clearly it's not an EU project. As I said, it can affect EU geopolitical security. Nevertheless, it's a Germany project, and the EU was not invited to discuss when that project was started to be implemented. Of course, EU has very limited possibilities to make an influence directly on German government, in order trying to convince them to abandon the project. But EU, I would say, political will is very clear. We had several resolutions recently passed, in European Parliament, where Parliament members were speaking about EU policy towards Russia after poisoning of Navalny, after his arrest, And of course, members of European Parliament demanded to put clear language against Nord Stream 2 project, demanding, that it should be stopped immediately. And that language was supported by absolute majority of European Parliament members. So unfortunately, the European Union is such kind of, organization from institutional point of view where central, institutions like Parliament, European Parliament, or even Commission, have quite limited instruments in some cases to influence member states' decisions. So that's pure, German government responsibility for this project. And it's pity that really at that time, when it was started to be implemented, such kind of big, geopolitically very significant projects were not discussed on EU level, as now, as I see really, if that project would be initiated now, EU would have possibility to discuss it much more seriously than it was, happening back in 2015, 2016.
Prime Minister, are you suggesting maybe that the German government kind of steamrolled approval of this with the EU?
It was not approved at all on EU level. Right. EU had only one, possibility to demand that this project should be, if that's, German government decision to implement that project, that the project should be implemented according to so-called gas directive, the said gas directive, which demands so-called unbundling. That the same business company has no right to be both owner of the pipeline and also to be owner of the gas, which is which goes, which is transmitted through that pipeline. So that is what EU is demanding, and we shall see how it will go if the pipeline will be finished, and how this directive will be implemented by first of all by German government.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, what is the Ukrainian view of the Nord Stream 2 project?
Thank you, John, and it's a great privilege to participate in this discussion, especially given the fact that two previous interventions are largely in line with the way how Ukraine treats all of the discussion and all the project as general. We, of course, understand that the new American administration is forming its strategy with regards to the Euro-Atlantic agenda, and there's no doubt that the energy security in the whole Europe is the issue which occupies an important place in this agenda. So hopefully this discussion may have a very good input on the strategic view in ADC on this. So in a second, I would not really go and repeat what was said by colleagues, and will not really go into details, but I'm going to mention a number of things about Nord Stream 2 we should know. For Ukraine, for the energy security of Ukraine and European Union, for the region, and this is like more and far-reaching initiative, which goes not only beyond the economical input, but also it has a very strong political and geopolitical input. I'd like to start with one thing in this regard, that is this project is definitely Nord Stream 2 is not the economically available project aimed to diversify the gas supplies to Europe. If it would be so, I'm sure that there will be no problem for Gazprom to obey the general rules applicable to gas supplies and to unbundle itself, because it's purely the economic strategy, but it is not, it's geopolitical strategy. So, and we should really remember that since the beginning of the Nord Stream 2, it was crystal clear that this project was an element of the Kremlin geopolitical master plan. And I regret to say that I doubt that the democratic world has such a master plan today, for this Russian aggressive actions. Just to mention a few: illegal annexation of the part of the territory of Georgia, illegal annexation of the Crimea, and occupation of Donbass, war in Syria, interference in the US, France, Germany, and other EU countries' elections, massive disinformation campaigns, propaganda around the world, including interference into the Brexit process, pandemics now, persecution of the political opposition in Russia, civil society, and total censorship in the media, poisoning of the Alexei Navalny, and I can really continue. And we should have no illusions that Nord Stream 2 is the project a part of all the mentioned before. It is in fact an integral part of these events, which are not simply someone's bad or wrong decisions making. It's really a strategy, and all of us participating in this discussion today understand it. It is aimed to obviously not just against Ukraine, against the whole free world. And this is exactly how, what is our take in the beginning of any position we announce or pronounce when it comes to the Nord Stream 2. Of course, we hear the views of our opponents saying that the pipeline is arguing that Russia is working to ease Ukraine's inevitable economic pain from the Nord Stream 2 newfound efficiency by committing a ship gas through Ukraine until 2024. We have no illusions about Russia, and I'm sure none of us here has illusions. Believing that Putin will honor that commitment requires the suspension of disbelief and ignores recent history. So none of us has illusions, and we do not have illusions further. So any decisions we're advocating for in terms of Nord Stream 2, they should be based on this understanding, which is obvious to my opinion. And it is also confirmed by recent negotiation on the new gas transit contract. So in 2019, Moscow did agree to sign a new gas transit contract with Ukraine, but did so because US sanctions against Nord Stream 2 stopped the pipeline in its tracks. And it was a huge period of uncertainty, and this was to some extent a very important signal for Ukraine, which allows us to ensure the energy security and the security of each and every citizen. So here I really would like to thank the US Congress. The inclusion of the bipartisan Nord Stream 2 sanctions in both in this year's and the last year's NDAA has caused an international pipeline, insurance, and many other vital companies to withdraw from the project. The bipartisan sanctions law have been a tremendous success for the US, Ukraine, and transatlantic security. And having these sanctions and their reiteration would allow us to keep this pressure and to keep to make Russia further capable and needed to pay its price for the disinformation, for the annexation of the territories and hybrid threats and the geopolitical games they are playing against the whole free world. So I will stop here and hope that we will have the opportunity to go into more details. But this is our take. It's not new. It has been a sustainable position of Ukraine since the very beginning of this project, and we're happy that by the end of the day, we're also supported by US sanctions and the political pressure of the key stakeholders.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, but I'd like to follow up with one specific question. Prime Minister Kubilius made the point that if Nord Stream 2 is completed, Moscow might be willing to escalate its war in eastern Ukraine because we'll not worry about the pipeline. What is your view of that?
Thank you so much. This is exactly the point I share, because one of the key strategic goals of this project is the undermining the energy security of Ukraine, undermining the role of Ukraine as the reliable energy partner for the European Union and for the whole continent. And this is part of the threats we face through all the period where the Nord Stream 2 has been built. But of course, completion of this project would pave the way and will open the whole field for Russia for full-fledged intervention to the territory of Ukraine and escalation of the conflict to the extent we cannot even imagine to ourselves. So I fully share this topic, and I'm sure that this is the part of the strategy, which has also been proven by the experience of many Baltic states who are luckily didn't face the occupation, but all of these countries were on the history of being blackmailed by Russia through the gas and energy resources. So this is not a unique experience, but Russians have definitely advanced far more than it was in the previous decades, and it's frightening and threatening us even more.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. von Kramon, you gave a very interesting analysis about how Nord Stream 2 got started in Germany, the politics of it. What are the politics today of the pipeline? I mean, we've seen strong German criticism, for example, of the arrest of Navalny, the crackdown on his protesters. Do you think that the politics in Germany are conducive to a change in position on Nord Stream 2?
Well, I think I'm not the first speaker of the Grand Coalition currently ruling the Federal Republic of Germany for sure, but I think it's a pretty tricky situation. I wish they would have the courage to not just to postpone, but really to cancel, to stop, to block the entire project. But obviously, for one or the other reason, there isn't a majority within the different political group, while maybe they also fear some of the compensation fees. I'm not sure, I don't know. I'm not a legal expert either. But I see that the political climate, the understanding, the awareness in the society of the danger to have a closer dependency or to depend even more on Russian gas is different now than it was maybe 5-6 years ago. So when you look at polls and when you think of whether you can change your decision, I think this would be a good timing. I know this is different in some of the regions. Interesting enough, if you look all over Germany, this is not the same, let's say, determination for stopping such a project. But nevertheless, I guess the majority understands that this is highly, I would say, political dangerous to continue with this project. But as you might know, there will be federal elections in September. There might be different coalitions. There might be new opportunities also in Berlin. And this is, of course, also a hope for us.
All right, a variation of along the same line of thought. As you know, the Biden administration believes it's very important, and I agree, to improve the relationship with Berlin after the very rocky Trump period. Some people argue that the best way to do that is to let Germany proceed with Nord Stream 2. Given the political situation in Germany that you just described, do you think that this is necessary to improve relations between Washington and Berlin?
I think what Trump did was not harmful for putting the right pressure on Berlin, because with Trump's approach to Nord Stream 2, it plays in the hand of the, let's say, anti-transatlantic community in Germany. So they were saying, you know, it's not against the project as such, but it's only because the US business administration would like to sell us the fracking gas. So if you want to support us getting out of this project, it might be easier if you not come in the same moment, or the US new administration doesn't come on board with their own business interest and economical interest to sell, let's say, not just climate-friendly fracking gas. And that, I guess, was a huge strategic mistake. if the new administration, and I think that President Biden and also Foreign State Minister Anthony Blinken do understand that very well, if they want to keep up the pressure, they might be appropriate to do so, and they should also apply maybe a different strategy. I see this could help, but not just linked with their own business interest.
Thank you. Prime Minister Kubilius, we have heard for years that Nord Stream 2 was inevitable and nothing can stop it. Yet US sanctions, congressional sanctions in 2019 and again in 2020, persuaded companies to drop from the project. Is the project inevitable, and are sanctions an effective way to stop it?
Well, as I said before, in general, for EU energy security, this project does not bring any added value. In opposite, it creates some geopolitical problems. So unfortunately, EU has very limited capacities legally to influence what will happen with the project. So that's why those who were opposing, the project from the very beginning, we were, lobbying back in United States, to put some pressure, and that pressure really was and is quite effective. So from that point of view, really, I cannot, criticize U.S. administration. Second, really, it would be much better if German government would decide by themselves that it's enough, and that the project should be stopped immediately. Of course, we understand, if you look from practical point of view, we understand very well that, here would be quite big losses for the companies, German companies, who are participating in building of that project. And perhaps that is the reason why, also government is not so courageous to stop such a project, without any clear answers of what will happen with those losses. So, but on another side, it's very clear that from that point of view, it opens also quite an interesting possibility to make much stronger pressure on Russian government, on Putin regime, which really are showing that, and especially before Duma elections, which will happen in autumn, they are showing that they are following, Lukashenko steps. So stopping now this project, if the German government would decide, it would be very strong message to Putin, perhaps most painful message. Then, the question is what to do with the losses which German companies can incur. And we just yesterday published together 3 former prime ministers, me, Miklos Zorinda from Slovakia, and John Burton from Ireland. We published op-ed in EU Observer, with a very simple message that, in such case, maybe EU member states could have a special, initiative to financially to assist those German companies which would suffer some loss. I don't know if that can fly, such an idea, but we decided that we can offer something like that. Second point, really, if in any case the German government will not see such a possibility to stop immediately, and to show to Moscow that what they are doing, not only outside of Russia, but also what they are doing inside of Russia, is totally unacceptable, and that is why the project is abandoned and stopped. Maybe it's possible to convince German government to stop construction of the project, at least till autumn, till elections will happen both in Russia and in Germany. We shall see what will happen in Russia. I predict that situation can be very, very dark and terrible. On another side, perhaps that we shall see new government in Germany with new leadership. And maybe this new government, as somebody is predicting that also the Greens will be inside of coalition, will be really much more reluctant to continue that project, of Nord Stream 2. The last point, which I have heard also from some of my German colleagues, for me sounded also in an interesting way. The third idea, if really the pipeline will not be stopped, I don't know what is the real situation, then it would be very important to not to allow gas transit to start to flow immediately. And since with this pipeline, Ukraine is becoming much more endangered, here could be a very simple requirement that the gas flows through that pipeline from Gazprom to Germany should be open only in that case if Moscow militaries, Russian militaries are withdrawn from eastern part of Ukraine, from Donetsk and Lugansk. So there are some possibilities how to use this, this situation in much better way if to compare what we see now.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I've got one more question for you. Secretary of State Blinken, when he testified at his confirmation hearings, made very strong statements against the project. And of course, President Biden has also spoken out against the project. Yet the report that the State Department released last week was considered soft on the project. They did not, according to critics, they did not mention the companies involved in the renewed construction. Do you think that the Biden administration and Secretary Blinken might be vulnerable on this point if they're not seen as going strongly against the project?
Well, Ambassador, I can make just some maybe not so serious remarks, but we can agree with you. You should assist us to criticize European authorities and European government, and we shall assist you to criticize Joe Biden administration on that issue. So that can be some kind of common job and common goal for us to achieve.
Has the German government consulted with the Ukrainian government about the Nord Stream 2 project? And is there anything that Germany might be able to do to persuade Ukraine that the project is not a danger to Ukraine?
I cannot call it the formal consultations, but Ukraine has been vocal from the very first day of the project. And basically, it wasn't like that we were looking and standing aside of it. So we delivered our messages from the very beginning at each and every fora which were applicable for that, including the highest possible level, at the level of the German government and also at the level of the European Union. So, once we found ourselves in our situation that while we're having this discussion, the pipeline is keep on being built. So to some extent, it was also part of the Russian strategy to stretch out this discussion and to take all the possible opportunity to stretch this discussion to make sure that we're in discussion and in argue while the pipeline is built. We had a very positive decision while we had the Romanian presidency in the Council of the European Union when the amendments to the EU gas directive were adopted and the unified procedure for access to EU market was granted. So it's been disturbed and stopped Russian Federation, but not for long. To cut the long story short, of course, we have been very precise from the very beginning, and this is a long-lasting project. And even now, when the U.S. sanctions are in force, we're in the middle of a situation when the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline is keep on being built. But for the sake of clarity, it's important to say that we were rather successful at some stages because we were vocal at all the possible forums, and some of the Nordic countries suspended their agreements over the continuation of building of these projects, like Denmark. But it didn't last long because some of the legal instruments were applied. So we were trying to to stop and to deliver our messages in each and every fora. We were sometimes more successful, sometimes less, but the reality is there. No argument is enough to stop this project finally. We succeeded only in suspending it at different stages. So we're hoping that additional pressure will be reinforced by the US sanctions to show that there is a sustainable non-support of this project, to make sure that other players could also join this instrument.
Thank you. We'll now turn to audience questions. People have been putting them in the Q&A section. And I'd like to start with one from Bob Walsh. He asked, how does the ultimate success or failure of Nord Stream 2 play into the current negotiations on other issues, such as Ukraine resuming water supplies to Crimea through the North Crimean Canal and ending the war in Donbass? I think Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina, you should get the first crack at that question. Would you like me to repeat it? Please unmute yourself.
Yes, John, I'm sorry. Can you repeat it? So something happened with the...
He asked, what is the connection between the failure or success of Nord Stream 2 on other issues such as Ukraine resuming water supply to Crimea and ending the war in Donbass? And is there any connection?
Well, I wouldn't say that there is a direct connection, but we always feel the escalation of the military activity of Russian Federation over the Donbass whenever Ukraine becomes more active or vocal, or international community and pressure becomes more precise against Russian aggression over the Donbass, including the sanctions and the pressure related to the Nord Stream 2, but I would estimate this project as part of this broader strategy of Russian Federation against the democratic world. I would not put it aside of the violation of human rights and occupation of Crimea and Donbass. So this is the part of the strategy, of the general strategy of Russian Federation, but the exact, to our mind, the exact purpose of this particular project, Nord Stream 2, is targeted to undermining the energy security of Ukraine, undermining the role of Ukraine as the reliant energy partner to the European Union, and let's say deploying another instrument of geopolitical influence right in the heart of the European Union, inside of the Union itself. So when it comes to this particular project, but generally, of course, this project, together with the first Nord Stream 1 project, together with other projects related to hybrid threats, disinformation, violation of human rights, and occupation of the territories of independent and sovereign countries, is definitely part of one strategy of the Russian Federation against the free world and democratization and sovereignty of the post-Soviet region as a whole.
Thank you. Okay, we have a comment and question from Gunther Rosnitz. Forgive me if I mispronounce your name. The director of the Austrian Peace Academy. First, he thinks that U.S. supporters of shutting down Nord Stream 2 are acting like hegemon. But then he asked, what does it cost to stop Nord Stream 2 now? And what alternatives are there? And at what cost in this time frame? And Ms. von Kramon, if you could take a shot at that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, thanks a lot. So since nobody really tested that case, I'm not so sure what kind of compensation might be due then. So maybe there are already, excuse me, some assessment or calculation within the federal government. Maybe there are some numbers available in Berlin, but, and that's important, you do not need alternatives. Why we don't need this gas? We have a pipeline coming from Ukraine. This is working perfectly. We have not even used the entire capacities from Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 1, excuse me. So there is a lot of, I mean, even capacities which could be used. we have everything in place. We would like to phase out of gas in the midterm, in the long run. We would like to use this, or would have used this investment in alternative fossil fuel energy infrastructure. We need storages, we need everything, but not a bigger dependency on gas. So Nord Stream 2 was never energy driven. It was never a project where demand was driven and where this initiative came from the business community. It came as a political approach against Ukraine to undermine their revenues, as my colleague Manuel Sarrazin has put it. The gas transport, the gas pipeline transport brings around 4 billion euros or US dollar, I'm not so sure, into the Ukrainian budget. It's the biggest taxpayer. It's international regulated. They have a very transparent board. So Naftogaz is probably, if you look through Ukraine, one of the best, let's say, restructured former state enterprises. And cutting them off is also from, let's say, more political economy point of view, really not the best idea. And therefore, I mean, I don't have to lobby for gas in general, but if you ask for alternatives, we don't need them. While there is not a lack of gas supply so far in the European Union.
Thank you. Andreas Metz of the German Eastern Business Association complains that we only have opponents of the project in this panel. I should explain that we are doing this because it's not well understood in Washington that there are substantial voices against the project in Germany and elsewhere within the European Union. But he asked a bunch of questions, and I'll put one to Prime Minister Kubilius. He points out that you have the pipeline going through Belarus. He says, would it not be better to shut down that pipeline because it supports Lukashenko instead of stopping Nord Stream 2? What is your view, Mr. Prime Minister?
Well, very good question. And exactly what we did, 10 years ago almost, I would suggest for German government and German business also to look into our experience. We had single pipeline, gas pipeline, which was coming through Belarus into Lithuania. We were 100% dependent on Russian gas, Gazprom gas supplies. And they were using that gas supply for all the different political, goals. They were increasing the price, and so on and so on. And they were making pressure on political community and whatever. So we were the first country among EU member states who decided to implement a new gas directive on unbundling fully 100% without any delays, just in order really to push ourselves to reform our gas sector according to European rules, and to, in such a way, to open a possibility to build an LNG terminal. We did it successfully. We have now LNG terminal in Lithuania, Klaipėda port, with something like 4 billion cubic meters annual capacity. Prices went down by 2 times. Now we are totally independent, of any kind of monopolies. Part of gas we're buying still through the same pipeline, but we can abandon that pipeline if we shall see that there is no need anymore, or if somebody is trying to use that pipeline as leverage against us. We are supplying gas, LNG gas, not only to Lithuanian consumers, but also to other Baltic states. And that is a way how really, we made the gas sector a commercial one, not any more political or geopolitical one. So that is a way how the whole Europe could move, and also Germany. Why to have, additional pipeline, and why to become more dependent on this, non-democratic regime in Moscow? That's for me very, 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 question where I do not have an answer. Maybe in 20 years time or 30 years time, or maybe earlier, Russia will become democracy. We shall have totally different story. But now, to become dependent on the country, which regime still very clearly shows its own, geopolitical will to influence Europe, to divide Europe, and so on and so on. That's from geopolitical point of view, it's a big mistake.
Thank you. Denis Zhatishin of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council has a question for Ms. von Kramon. What actions need to be done by the U.S., the EU, and Ukraine to stop Nord Stream 2?
Well, if we'd known, it's already a step ahead. I can't say. I mean, I don't think that the last month with the political pressure from the Trump administration really helped the situation. That rather closed the roads, as we say in Germany. So that rather made sure for everyone it's not about climate, it's not about Russia, it's about their own business interests. So this wasn't a very smart strategy. I guess if we could have a more sensitive approach, a more common approach where we say what is necessary in terms of the obligation coming from the Paris Agreement and saying how we're going to invest into the future, I think people would understand that this is a serious approach coming from the US rather than filling in this gap maybe with their own fracking gas. And I guess a broader, let's say, also information, more discussions, media attention, the situation, the growing tension in Russia, as Andreas and Olga have also put it, the situation becomes more and more difficult to really justify the so-called project. People do understand that obviously that was the wrong decision. And what Andreas has said, one option could be to, at some point, finish the project, finish the infrastructure, but make sure it will never be used for transport gas. So this is, of course, something which will be on the table. And if in this debate the US would play a constructive role, this might be definitely helpful, yes.
Okay, we have a question from Dmytro Shkurko of National News Agency of Ukraine for Deputy Prime Minister Stefanishina. The question is this: Ukraine has survived at least a few heavy clashes with Russia on the gas supply, and Russian propaganda always accuses Ukraine of being a not reliable partner. What lessons did Ukraine draw from these gas wars, including pure technical aspects, but also damage suffered and how to prevent such situations in the future? Or put simply, how does Ukraine protect itself against Russian aggression via gas cutoffs?
Yeah, the magic thing about the answer I will give you is that the answer to this question is already stamped in the last contract with Gazprom, because this contract is fully based on EU legislation. It's fully based on Ukrainian legislation approximated with the EU ones. And the principles of these contracts are fully based on the recently updated Annex 27 to the Energy Annex to the Association Agreement, whereas Ukraine and EU are committing themselves to have a single gas and electricity market. So I think this would be the best safeguard we can aspire for. But before that, of course, it's right reference that it was a couple of times where Russia went through a radical activities trying to lower the gas supplies and leave our population and European population without gas. But we have managed to take urgent measures together with our European partners and EU member states already back in 2014 and 15. And we have the agreements of the gas revers with Slovakia, Poland, and other neighboring countries. So basically, whenever Russia applied these radical measures, we have committed ourselves, and we have been the reliable supplier to Europe and the reliable supplier within Ukraine. So none of Ukrainian and EU citizens felt felt this radical steps from the Russian Federation, but of course they were not neglected by Ukrainian authorities, and they were largely voiced and highlighted everywhere. So this is where basically Russia has no instruments to affect our energy security. But of course, finishing this project will keep on undermining it. And the only answer could be the integration with the EU markets and forming the single space for competition and open our market for EU companies, because this is another part of the problem we have back in Kiev. So the answer is simple, and basically this was one of the most principal conditions we had over the negotiations of the new contract with Gazprom, and it's fully based on EU acquis.
Thank you. We have a question from Barry Shapiro. I think it's probably for Ms. von Kramon. How come Germany isn't leading the EU in a unified energy strategy, as Nord Stream 2 seems to be quite unilateral for German interests?
I'm not so sure whether Germany does lead the EU energy or unified strategy in that respect. And I was witnessing the same committee as Andreas has mentioned, that in our industry and technology, research and energy committee, there was an overwhelming majority against that. Why at that point the federal government of Germany has decided to more or less go unilateral in terms of the gas supplier with Gazprom to circumvent Ukraine and all the neighbors. I cannot say. It's really anti-EU. It's really anti the neighbors, anti-European. We know that there is a big reluctance in France. I mean, this is also a little bit difficult to understand why they at one point heavily against, and now they have withdrawn from their objections or resistance. Of course, Austria is on board with Germany. There are parts in the Netherlands, parts of Great Britain, where they have their shares in this consortium. But otherwise, I mean, looking around in the Scandinavian and the southern parts of Europe, there is no support from their side. And why Germany has taken this very unilateral stand, and knowing this will be against the majority of the partners, I can't tell you. I wasn't part of this decision-making process. I can just say sorry and regret what was happening, because it's harmful. I know this.
All right, thank you. Our time is just about up. Just one more point for you, Ms. von Kramon. You stressed what you saw as the Trump commercial interest in pushing against Nord Stream 2, but there were people in the administration, like Secretary of State Pompeo, who stressed the geopolitical aspect of the project. Don't you think was also part of the approach?
Sure, but as I said, it was kind of misinterpreted from media representatives. It was picked up by certain, let's say, multiplicators, think tanks in Germany. It was easy to say, well, it is not about the geopolitical approach. It is mainly about the commercial interest of the US. And that what made the public in general, the public in Germany, very, let's say, skeptical or not convinced that the US is concerned about our dependency on Russian gas, but rather be in favor of selling their own gas. And that's how it was mainly sold in some of the papers and some of the magazines.
That was certainly a smart tactical move on their part, just as stressing the US as hegemon argument, even as maybe Germany as hegemon was responsible for this moving forward in Europe. Anyway, I would like to thank everyone for participating in this panel. It gave Washington some insight into voices in Germany and in Europe, not heard so much on Nord Stream 2. And we will continue our conversation on Nord Stream 2 in the future. So thank you all for participating.